Welcome to the Influential Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Duncan, and my dream is to inspire moms to pursue their goals and help them make a difference in their world. I'm a mom of 2 young boys, a wife to my high school sweetheart, and a lawyer. This show is a place to hear stories of moms working hard to have a positive influence in their profession or their community, and sometimes both, even as they juggle their responsibilities at work, at home, and to their children. You'll get tangible, practical tips for managing the chaotic world of motherhood and work. Come along as we hear these stories and feel inspired to step outside of our comfort zone as leaders and as a positive force within our communities. I believe that moms can change the world. So we're here with Hilary Yancey, and I'm so excited about this, Hilary, because I started listening to you on Annie Downs' podcast and fell in love with you and your story and think that you are having a huge positive impact on your world, and I'd love for our listeners to get to know you. So welcome, Hilary.
Thank you so much for having me. So I am Hilary. I'm a 5th-year graduate student in philosophy. So I'm getting my Ph.D. in philosophy at Baylor, which is what brought my husband and I to Waco. We have 2 kids, a son named Jackson, who just turned 3, and a daughter named Junia, who will be 1, I can't believe I'm saying that, in a month. So we have a very busy life. This summer we found and adopted a puppy who showed up under our house, which is a fun little story. So our house is very chaotic, but a lot of joy. And I am teaching my first seminar this fall and writing both creatively and then working on my dissertation. So that's kind of what occupies my everyday life.
Oh my goodness, you have a lot going on. You need more hours in your day.
Yeah.
Which part of all of that feels like it's, I guess, the most life-giving to you? And then which part is just creating the most stress for you right now?
Oh, good question. In a way, it shifts depending on the day or the week or the year.
Yep.
Right now, in October of 2018, I think the teaching for the first time probably creates some stress, mostly because I'm trying out a syllabus that I wrote myself and I haven't tweaked before. So each week as I prepare to teach class, I'm wondering, okay, is this enough material, too much, too little? Will my students really gravitate towards these examples, or will they find them irrelevant? And so that sort of uncertainty and kind of experimenting for the first time is definitely nerve-wracking.
Absolutely.
I'm more in my element probably when it comes to writing of any kind, either my dissertation or creatively. And it's interesting. I feel like kids are both life-giving and stressful. They're like a stressful life-giving force in your life. So they seem to weave through both those things almost simultaneously.
When I first heard you on another podcast, what just made me gravitate towards you was the way you shared your story about your journey with faith and motherhood and marriage and being a grad student through it all with your son Jack's pregnancy and his diagnosis during your pregnancy and then your family's journey since then. So I know you've written a book, and so I'm sure you want to share a little bit about that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that part of your story?
Sure. Yeah. So I got pregnant very early in my graduate school career. So I was about a semester-ish in to being in a PhD program when we found out we were pregnant with Jack. And I assumed, maybe like some of y'all, that it would be really straightforward, that it would be a fairly nonchalant pregnancy, that I would need probably just the help of the internet to walk me through it. But around 20 weeks, we were diagnosed, or Jack was diagnosed with cleft lip and palate, which prompted a more extensive ultrasound. And from there, we learned a bit of a kaleidoscope of things. Jack is missing his right eye and his right external ear. And he has some differences in the formation of his jaw, which meant that when he was born, his airway was compromised in certain positions. So around 20 weeks, we were learning all of these new dimensions of our son, and it really shook up everything I had expected pregnancy to be, everything I had expected motherhood to be. It didn't occur to me that I would get a diagnosis that would make me worry for my son.
Mm-hmm.
It never occurred to me that I would need to learn parenting from doctors and nurses. We were in the NICU once Jack was born for about 6 weeks, and he needed, and he eventually got a tracheostomy tube to help him breathe securely,
Mm-hmm.
and then a G button so that he could eat because his airway was narrow and he has some trouble controlling his jaw. So he's just now working on learning to eat by mouth. So those things are not typical things you learn as a first-time mother. And I grappled in the NICU and in coming home with what it meant to be Jack's mom
Mm-hmm.
when it felt like there were other people who could take better care of him in some ways, other people who could keep him alive. It was so obvious to me from the first moments that he was born, even in the delivery room itself, that I was going to be in a position of needing other people to walk alongside me.
Right.
And that rocked my world a little bit. And so my book, which is called Forgiving God, is about that. It's about the world getting rocked and about confronting God with that story and with both the expectations I had of myself as a mom and of the pregnancy and how those things would unfold. And then the reality of this amazing, mysterious person in front of me and what it meant to be a part of his life as his mom and how I was going to do that. And hopefully the book leaves off in a place of having gone farther along the journey, but by no means having ended it.
Absolutely.
Jack is now 3 and very different than he was when I wrote the book. So
yeah. Well, and I'm sure the challenges for you as Jack's mom have shifted, that, they haven't gone away, but they've probably just changed over the course of the last 3 years.
Yeah. I like to say that Jack is like a kaleidoscope. There is a shift in one way, even a small shift as he learns new skills or as he discovers new things, and they just shift the picture.
Yeah.
And for some kids, that shift might be almost unnoticeable. And for us, it is much more noticeable, both in really beautiful ways and in challenging ones.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that has struck me when, I've been following you now for a while on Instagram especially, but, reading your beautiful blog with just your creative writing, and I know that's not creative writing because it's real life, but, just the way you tell stories and your authenticity on Instagram and social media, and then you've written a book. So how did you, as you were weaving through this part of your life where you're a young wife and a new mom and a new grad student, how did you know that you needed to share your story? And how did you decide that, this is something you wanted to share not only on social media, but to actually sit down and write a book? Can you tell us kind of how you kind of got to that point in the midst of everything that was going on?
Yeah, I originally didn't know that I was writing a book. And even when I kind of realized that I had written enough words that could be a book, I wasn't sure if I would want to publish it. I think I was led forward mostly by the sense that what was so hard about the NICU is its indescribability. It is very hard to put to words what it's like to walk those hallways, what it's like to sit in a room that doesn't have a clock in it, waiting for the time to be marked by doctors coming in and out and telling you updates, or by the time that your nurse or the nurse for your child is supposed to change their diaper or take their temperature or give them a feeding. And I remember desperately wanting to preserve something of that experience because I thought about the people who had been sitting next to me while I was in the NICU and how there was a community and a shared witness to what that time was and how very different it was. And I thought, it would be powerful to bring other people into that circle of witnesses. And it's so easy because social media makes things accessible to us, and that's beautiful, to also end up thinking everybody's story is a lot like yours. You tend to gravitate towards people who've had shared experiences, and I don't think that's necessarily bad, but I wanted to tell my story ultimately, I think, because I wanted to open up a little bit of a window into a very different kind of motherhood, a very different kind of first few months or first experience. And I've never known another way to write than the way I write on my blog or on social media.
Well, it's beautiful.
And
it's so authentic.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I sort of think we forget sometimes that we have the power in those spaces to decide what it is we're going to be like. And it's so easy. Instagram, as much as I love it, I have to watch my own sort of way of approaching it because it's so tempting to notice that somebody else has so many following, has such a size of a following or so many likes on that post, or they use that filter. And so their picture looks a little bit better, a little bit sharper, a little bit more like, oh, there they are in the pumpkin patch doing the awesome, cute thing.
Yeah.
And what's amazing? That you have an opportunity, no matter where you are or how many people are following you. And I tell this to myself all the time, to bring them in and say, hey, witness my life for a second, and I will witness yours. And in that act of witnessing for and alongside each other, we are creating the community that we actually want, and we get a say over that.
I love that. And I think you're absolutely right that it's so easy for us to see just such little slivers of, the world that somebody may or may not actually live in. I think that you have just hit the nail on the head as far as, creating community together, and that being the positive influence that social media can have. I think it gets such a bad rap for a lot of valid reasons, but if we can turn this ship around into this authentic community, then it can have so much good power over the world that we live in, and can actually be a really good thing. So I love that that's your perspective, and I think you're absolutely carrying it out.
Well, thank you.
Day to day. So good job on that. So yeah, as you've been sharing your story and doing that through all different channels, your blog and social media and your book, what is the hope that you have, other than this is the world that I live in, but this is my authentic world that I'm living day to day. But beyond that, is there any other kind of impact that you're hoping to have on other young moms? And maybe being a grad student plays into that too. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I probably have so many things. How would I choose just one? Well, first of all, I want the world to be a place where people with disabilities are seen and are seen for the fullness of who they are, which includes but is not defined by or merely as their disability. So I want to share bits of Jack's life. It's a very fine line. I think about this all the time, about what it is that I'm sharing, because of course Jack's experience of his life is his own, and I want to preserve the space for him to craft a narrative that he wants to share about his own life experiences, just as I would for my daughter or for friends or for others. And at the same time, I want to connect with moms, both of other kids who have a variety of disabilities, in saying, hey, I'm here. I am here in the midst of making choices that you might not think other people have to make, but you do, and you notice that you do, and you wonder, are other people doing this? So I want to share things that I think might feel invisible or feel isolating or lonely to moms who are in similar situations to me. And I want to share that particularly with moms who don't have those experiences. I think there's so much power in knowing a story about someone, knowing a name, knowing a picture, knowing a 30-second Instagram video every so often, right? That just talks through, this is what it means for my son to get a drink of water. This is what it means for us to decide whether or not going to the playground today is a good idea. And it's not better or worse than someone whose kid doesn't have disabilities of the kind that Jack has, but it's different. And there's value in sharing those stories with each other because we come to better appreciate and understand the ways that we could make our world more accessible to each other. I really want the world to become a place where people have access to it. Full
Absolutely.
access.
Yeah. That's so important because again, when we're seeing these perfect little slivers, no one, whether or not a person has a child with a disability, no one's world is perfect. But having that perspective on, like you said, what somebody else's day-to-day life is like is so valuable just in, I think, appreciating that everybody's coming into our communities and into our world from a different place, and they're all so valuable. All of our perspectives are so valuable. If we all had the same experience, then I think that'd be tragic, you know. But it's so important, and I think that's why it's great that you're sharing your story and your perspective on the world based on the story that you're living and how you're turning beauty. You're turning it into something beautiful by sharing it, and I think encouraging other families and other moms. So I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's amazing is that before we even got pregnant with Jack, before we knew that we were going to have a baby, let alone somebody who was going to have a body that had been formed in a really unique way, I was already interested in the philosophy of disabilities. That was an interest of mine from before I got to grad school. And I started to do a little bit of philosophy, thinking about those questions. And it's one of those really interesting intersections of my working academic life and my everyday gritty dealing with it life. And I think that's actually one of the things I also really want to share are pictures of the kind of relentless integration I think our lives always end up having one way or the other.
Yeah.
Everything bleeds into everything. And it's not bad that happens. It's not bad that sometimes work follows you home, or that sometimes your kids and thoughts about your kids and what they're going through follow you to work. Sometimes that's actually really fruitful. And for me, I think about the academic questions around disability, the theoretical questions around disability, and I come home and I'm bringing those reflections into my everyday interactions with my own kid and with other kids that he's getting to know and other people we're interacting with. And then when I turn around to do philosophy, when I stand in front of students, I want to model for them a person who is trying to take on questions that have a tangible significance, a tether to the world.
Right.
And it's so easy, I think, for people to get the impression that academic life or philosophy is full of theory and only a little bit full of the practical, right? We ask questions about, what the good life is in this very abstract way. And I'm going to say, no, that's not all that we do. We also ask the question, what is it to create a world where we recognize as true the idea that we can have a really wide variety of what a good life is?
Yeah.
We ask about what it is to be just to each other or to be courageous. We ask what it is to make a space accessible. What does that mean? How would we do it? And because I'm thinking about that in the grittiness of my everyday life with Jack, I end up asking, I think, better questions as a philosopher when I end up at the office.
And I don't think any of that is by accident. I don't think any of those interweavings, within your life are by accident. I think all of that was orchestrated, by God in your life, and just the fact that you were interested in it and now you're able to weave the two together in the classroom and at home. What an amazing experience you're providing on both sides for your students and for your kids, because you're able to have that authentic kind of personal experience on both ends. So I think that's wonderful. And I don't think it was by accident.
I don't think so either.
Yeah. So let's talk about being in grad school as a young mom. So I imagine you have to, with, you're caring for Jack, and then you've got cute little June, and you've got your husband and your grad students and just life generally. So how do you, what's your life hack in all of that?
Oh man, ask for help.
Yeah.
I have a babysitter for June.
Oh, good.
And I admit very freely, I am not able to do almost any philosophical work physically in my house. I'm just too easily distracted. And I had these lofty ambitions that I would be this kind of late night. I would turn to my philosophy at 8 p.m. and, get so much productive thinking done. Nope, that doesn't happen.
Not possible.
I have to actually maybe try to take a shower and definitely watch The Real Housewives and go to bed at a normal time.
Close your eyes, get some rest.
Yep. And so one of the things, maybe this sounds kind of cheesy, but I have tried really hard, even just these last couple of years, to say out loud, I don't have to go as fast as everybody else.
Yeah.
Grad school in particular is a time frame, like all school is, right? There's a certain amount of time where you're guaranteed funding, or there's a certain time frame that people expect you to be able to finish your degree in, or there's the sort of crushing student loan situation, or whatever it is that makes you feel like I've got to go at a certain pace.
Right.
Even if it was just the person down the hall is going at that pace, so I have to. And I've tried, I think, to say it would be okay if it took me longer. Some stuff happened in my life that meant that it's going to take me longer, but it doesn't mean I don't still get to do it.
Absolutely.
And so there are lots of nights where it's like, well, I didn't work on my dissertation, but I put my kids to bed and I enjoyed that, and I'm thankful for that. And then there are also days where it's like, I didn't really see or play with Junia that much today. That's okay, because I worked on something else.
Right.
So the idea that your day should be crammed full of each activity, I have given up.
Yeah.
It usually can't be. But your week can be, or your season can have all of those things, even if each day doesn't have them.
I agree. I think of it as buckets, and you can't fill every bucket to the same level every day. It's just not possible. But if I don't fill, this bucket as much today, then I know that it'll be filled more tomorrow. And in the end, it will all balance out. But it's what a relief to give yourself that freedom, and to tell yourself that, because I think as a working mom, I think it's impossible to fill all the buckets the same way every day. And I think the moment we can say, you know what, that's okay. It's such a release and a relief, both of those things.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. So,
well, and to be fair to my husband, he does almost all of the cooking in our house. So we have a really wonderful gift in that. That is something life-giving to him. It's something he enjoys.
Yeah.
He's very good at it. And so I think we've actually settled in to finding those chores.
Yeah.
I don't love the word chores. Those sort of household tasks that, even though they're work and not necessarily relaxation, we've found the ones that help each of us kind of recenter at the end of the day. And so I think for my husband, the act of cooking and the act of creating a meal is a sort of centering kind of work.
Yep.
And for me, it's cleaning the kitchen, kind of I have my certain routine and what I clean when, and I listen to some music and I put the house to bed, and that's a kind of centering for me. And I think finding what each of that was for us was a hack, because it prevented people from being resentful of having to do more work, or feeling like they were doing a work that was more draining for them.
Right.
And it is, you get this moment at the end of the day where I turn out the lights in each room and I think, okay, the day is done.
Yeah.
Okay. And that exhale is really lovely.
Yeah. Put it to bed. Put the day to bed. Yeah. So how do you and your husband find time for each other and marriage?
We're pretty relentless. We have a phrase in our house that we use often called drawbridge up.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say that, what we mean is we need a little bit of time where we're just hanging out with each other. And we usually reserve at least a few nights a week to, even if we aren't sort of having a super deep conversation, we're sitting next to each other reading, or we're watching something together. So no sort of separate plans, no extra meeting, no outside kind of distractions from that. And that's been, I think, a huge part of how we've just checked in with each other regularly. And that, and, we really love to put our kids in the car and go for a drive.
Yep.
And the kids are strapped down and they're not upset. My son loves to look out the window, and he's recently discovered that he can play with the automatic window.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Yep. So, he's having a good time. My daughter will either sleep or she'll sort of babble in the back, but everybody's content. And we just hang out. We just talk. How was your day? What did you do at work? And I sometimes feel like we're not always that quick in the culture. I don't even know. Can we call it a culture of motherhood? I sort of think so.
Yeah, I think so.
To think that it would be okay for our kids to approach something like boredom or, non-activity. I think there's a strong temptation to think you should be providing your kids with certain kinds of mental stimulation. Yeah, all the time. And I think releasing myself from that expectation and saying, it's really okay if my kids are in the car for 45 minutes and we get a Diet Coke at Sonic and we drive around and we're just hanging out and we're just checking in about the day. They're fine. That's not a bad thing. Maybe it's even a good thing to model for them that we can have time as a family where mom and dad are connecting with each other and talking and checking in. And that's something that's a part of the rhythm of our family life, and that it's not solely about whether I can get you to do one more puzzle or play with chalk outside one more time, or, do a finger painting or something like that.
Yeah, that's so important. And how simple, and just, let's just get in the car and go. And I love that. I think that sometimes I think we overcomplicate things, it doesn't have to be coordinating some luxurious, date night, babysitter, dinner out type of situation. Like you can connect just as much just on a drive in the car. And that's so important. That's wonderful. You recently wrote a blog post about living big and bold. And I'm curious about your vision for that in your life and what that looks like for you.
Well, immediately it means getting my Ph.D.
Yes.
And finishing that work.
Yeah.
But I think for me it means wanting things for myself. And that act, not in isolation from the pursuit of them, but actually the act of sitting in the midst of myself and saying, I really love to teach. I want that to be a part of my life. Or I really love to write. I want to keep writing books. I want to keep working on sharing my story and my reflections with the world. And the possibility of saying that out loud and permitting myself to believe that doesn't compromise being a good mom. It doesn't compromise being an attentive mom. It doesn't compromise the vision of motherhood that I think is held up and that I certainly have held up for a long time as sort of ideal, but it enhances it because it's going to be me being more of myself.
Which is going to make you a better mom, right?
Yeah. I'm the one parenting these kids. I better be me. I can't really be anybody else. So I think among the things I'd like to pursue after I'm done with this PhD, I'd really love to get trained to do some ASL interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Is that what you use with Jack right now?
So we use a combination of signing and then speech. He works with a speech therapist, and then we all know sign to a greater or lesser degree. But I'd really love to become proficient in it.
Yeah.
I'd love to learn to play the guitar and the banjo.
Oh, fun.
I would love to write some more books. I'm not sure how teaching will fit into my life just yet, but I really want to keep doing philosophy. And the thing I love about philosophy is that I actually really believe that it's done all the time by everyone. And so it's not confined to a classroom. So I would like to see what kind of spaces I could make where we do philosophy together.
Oh, I love that. Like outside of the classroom.
Yeah, because everybody thinks about their big decisions in their life and tries to determine what the right thing to do is. That's doing philosophy. Or people, make decisions based on how they define or understand an action. That's philosophy. It's happening everywhere.
Right.
So I'd love to find some ways to think about bringing that just into communities in new ways.
Oh, I love that. Come to Greensboro.
Okay. Yeah. No, I would love to.
That's wonderful. And what a great way to teach in an unconventional way, because that's essentially what that is. That's wonderful. So as we finish up, I'm going to end with kind of a fun question. Okay. But before I get there, what would your advice be for a mom who wants to have positive influence in her community or in her profession, but she feels overwhelmed by the fact that, she is a mom and she has those responsibilities and that identity, and the thought of putting focus on herself might feel overwhelming or, like it's not what she's supposed to be doing, but she has these dreams for having a positive influence. What would your advice be to that mom?
Oh, what a good question. I think I would say two things. The first is imagine yourself in conversation with your kids, not when they're grown and doing this for themselves, but when they're in elementary school and middle school, maybe even the beginning of high school. Imagine what kind of story you want to tell them about how they as a family worked together, how you all supported each other. And that's going to include, I would hope, how they actually, even in the midst of being younger, being kids, they helped you. Your family does work together, and your kids participate in that by all kinds of ways, some of which is helping make space for you to pursue that which you are passionate about. I think we want to be able to tell our kids stories where we show them how they contributed to making things happen, even if it's as simple as, and when you were at school, some afternoons you went home with this friend because I was doing this thing.
Yeah.
Or when you were little, you stayed at a babysitter's house because I was working on this big project. And by you being in that space and learning things from that person, you enabled me to do this thing I'm really passionate about. And so it's a work we share together.
Yes, I love that.
That's something we can actually embrace as moms, as parents. The idea that we're sharing our work with our kids and we're inviting them to participate in the things that ultimately we'd want them to care about that are outside of our family unit, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing would just be to trust that the things you love the most are faithful. They're going to stick around. It will not be the case that you'll be a young, new mom forever. It will also not be the case that your kids will have the same constellation or kaleidoscope of needs forever. And as those shift, I think space and time is going to open for passions and loves to be pursued in ways that you might think are impossible. So never claim for yourself something like, well, I just can't do that. I just can't love that, or I'm going to have to give up loving that. It might be that for a little while you can't express your love for something or your passion for something or your desire to influence in a positive way an issue or a community or a person. But that will not always be true. And if you are faithful to loving that thing and holding it even temporarily in your hands without being able to put an action to it, eventually an action will make itself, a way will make itself apparent. And then you just take that next step.
That is fabulous advice. And I love your perspective. Again, I just think that, your approach towards motherhood and work and influence, and the way those things can weave together and should weave together, is really, really valuable. So thank you for that. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So here is the question everyone is dying to know. Because you live in Waco, have you ever seen Chip and Joanna Gaines? That's the question we all need to know.
No. I've only been to the silos itself, I think twice. I went kind of close to the opening, and then my sister was in town a little while later, and I went with her. But no, I had a friend of mine who was at an Indian food restaurant in Waco, and she ended up sitting at a table, and Chip was the person like sitting at the table next to her.
Okay, well, that's pretty close.
That's the closest. Yeah.
That's pretty close. That's funny. Well, I thought, because it's funny like that when I hear Waco now, that's my association with Waco. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like that, that's what that's the world we live in now, is that things revolve around, I guess the entertainment industry. But whenever I hear somebody is from Waco, that's the first thing I think of.
Yeah. No, I think that's true for a lot of people.
That's funny. Your story is amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and about your book. Your book is Forgiving God. And where can we find you and your book?
So you can find me mostly on Instagram at Hilary Yancey. You can find my book on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold, at least as far as I know, on the internet.
Very good.
And I am, if you are near an Amazon bookstore, I have seen it in Amazon bookstores. Those are my sightings of hard copy.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. Well, I hope that, you end up with some new folks who are reading your words and following your story and your authenticity in all the ways that you share it. And I hope that we get some more books out of you because you're such an incredible writer. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilary. I really appreciate you being on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in for another inspiring episode of the Influential Motherhood podcast. Be sure to follow my own journey in motherhood and work at Melissa Duncan JD on Instagram, and follow the behind the scenes of the podcast at Influential Motherhood on Instagram and Facebook. If you're enjoying the Influential Motherhood podcast, please take a second to leave a rating or review in iTunes. It is how you can help other moms find the show so they can be inspired by these stories. See you next week.